Yes, we don't need a peek in that friggin' big one. You gotta throw that. Why don't we have a peek anyway?
My apologies for being late.
We're trying to get a truck.
It's Craig's call.
Cooler. Get a cooler. That one cooler. Yeah, cooler.
Told you I was giving you up, didn't I?
Yes, I like it.
So this next part, I'm gonna be so much more willing to go all over the map. And definitely want to hear from you all. I'm impressed that you came back, so I suppose that's a good sign. Or you're required to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never mind. And I still have tons of topics that if we dry up on questions, I still have a lot of things that I can share with you all. But let's go to that discussion about bodies and taking care of somebody. It's kind of what it comes down to, really. Like, how do we do this? If we perceive someone's gender and then we engage with them in whatever way, how are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to do this respectfully? How do we look after someone's body? And that is a question. It's one of the reasons why for trans and other gender diverse people that getting medical care is a huge deal. How does this even work? My experience with medical coverage, it's really been 24 years since I started my gender transition. What do I do? Do I list my gender on my health insurance as male, but my body's female? If I list it as male, how do I take care of this body? If things are coded a certain way based on gender, then does that mean that those claims will be denied? With respect to any type of gender affirming care, every health coverage policy, you read what it covers, what it covers, what it covers, what it covers, and here's what we don't cover. Boom. It seems like practically the only thing was gender transition related care over and over and over. So that has changed quite a bit. And I think, overall in Washington State, the coverages are a lot more comprehensive. So if I have an issue, like I had to get a hysterectomy. All right, well, is that going to be covered? Ultimately, the claim initially was denied. No, we're not going to do this. I had a surgeon that went to bat for me on that and chatted with the insurance company. As a matter of fact, the mantra in a lot of the gender community is appeal, 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 because it just shows up. All those systems have gender as part of the process in the same way that the school districts. So how do we do this? If our system doesn't allow us to switch a gender or how does this skew any statistics? There's lots of questions to sort out. The physicians that I know who are really knowledgeable on offering care to trans people, they say you look after the body. So how do you know what body you're dealing with? Ultimately, what so many of us are in the position of doing is having to stumble and bumble our way through talking about it. And, what if we can't talk about it? What if we're unconscious or, struggling? How do we do that? Well, if I'm unconscious and, you have to look after my body because I'm bleeding or, whatever issue is going on, then just have at it. Just have at it. But don't, my hope is that you don't panic at what you discover. When we were having lunch, I talked about one of the first stories I heard about somewhere on the East Coast where a woman was in a car accident. The medics came. She's deeply in need of care, and the medic discovers that she has a penis and absolutely freaks out. I'm not touching her. I'm not doing this. Dude's got or chick's got a penis or whatever was said, and she ended up dying. Would she have died anyway? I don't know. But ultimately it made pretty big headlines simply because it was a situation where somebody didn't know how to handle it. So while it might be surprising, I imagine in your work worlds, you have a lot of surprising things that you don't expect, that you don't encounter. And hopefully you are either, you've got training, you figure out how to take that deep breath or two and do your checklist of how do I need to adjust in this situation, and that you can do the same in these types of circumstances. I just, last summer, I'm totally healthy most times in my life, but last summer, just let's just bleed out our anus for no reason at all. I had a pretty significant intestinal issue and lots of blood really quickly, and a pretty significant emergency. And my wife is falling apart. I'm like, honey, please just try to drive the car. Ultimately, I grabbed the phone and called 911 after I'd already passed out once. We need some help here. They had her pull over and instead sent the aid truck to where we were. And my poor wife is just losing her marbles because she is so scared that I won't get care because I'm transgender, and she's got to tell people and then, cross her fingers and hope that things go okay. I'm not quite as concerned about it, but I'm also the one that's passing out. She's supposed to be there handling it. Ultimately, the folks who encountered me and my body took care of me and my body. Most of the time I was conscious, so I'm sharing what I need to share along the way. And it's always just a difficult thing to do because I don't know how it's landing. What does that mean for the person who's hearing it? What I know in my world is that I have zero idea what's going on for that person. If there's shock, if there's some type of religious conflict, does it interrupt somebody's thinking to such a degree that they don't know how to look after my body? Then I'm in a life-threatening situation, whether it's life-threatening or not. I feel like I recently saw some type of research publication that said something like broken arm syndrome or something, which is an interesting way that they described care for transgender people. You've broken your arm and all people can do is focus on the fact that you're a transgender person. And meanwhile, your arm gets forgotten. That happens actually pretty frequently. I witnessed it myself with a friend of mine, a transgender man who was pretty ill and had some type of brain infection going on. Really, what's the expression? I don't know, really being a close call for him. And people on the hospital floor, tons of them pouring into the room over and over to see the guy that was there for the sex change surgery. He was not there for a sex change surgery. He's busy dealing with a raging infection in his brain, being close to death. So I do like to think that our society is progressing and that that's not quite the way it could go or should go. that hopefully it's like, oh, that's interesting, but let's see if we can get back to taking care of this person and why they're here. So what do you do? What do you all do in your work world? Maybe you could tell me how you engage with a person who's in a medical crisis. And what information are you getting from them? And what do you do if you can't get that from them? Anybody? Yeah?
So the person do no harm. So not really harm the patient. Do what's best for the patient. That runs the whole gamut, so I'll go over that. From here, we can go many directions. We have a mnemonic called PQRST, so onset probability quality severity time. I'm gonna ask the patient if they are not in a state to answer correctly, and I talk to family member, bystander, et cetera.
Mhm.
So we all do this together, do what's best for the patient, and then handing that care off to the
Do you have any situations where you would say, are there anything else that I should know about your medical history?
Sometimes, for example, people may be forthcoming, or they may straight up lie to you. They're reluctant to share.
Yeah.
They don't know.
What's another example? Besides gender or something? Like I could say, yeah, I don't want to tell somebody about my
Drugs,
drugs.
alcohol.
Mental health issues.
Right, lots of things, yeah.
I feel like to me, it's all dependent on the kind of call. When it comes to like life-threatening things, it's at the end of the day, it's all about patient advocacy. To do what is best for the patient. It doesn't matter what gender it is, but that doesn't really factor. The only times for me personally, when it's going to factor, we have someone who identifies as transgender who's having suicidal ideations. That's something I'm asking them because, that is why we were called. If they're having some kind of emotional struggle with something. Asking that's really the only time I've ever really asked, what do you identify as?
Mhm.
And just so I know, and so I can let the hospital know, what is your nickname or what, just more important like the hospital, because when we go to the hospital, if you are in the hospital system when you were 6, you were still in there as, for example, like male, and with this name, and then now you're 15, seeing you're going to be in the hospital of record, but under the name. So that's really the only time that I've personally dealt with it, of dealing with those type of calls, of having to like negotiate what gender you're putting down.
Right.
Communicate with the hospital.
So it seems like if there are gender and other situations too, where you're trying to gain more information that can help you, that somebody might be hesitant to disclose for all of the reasons that you said. And you're saying, hi, Aiden, sorry you're in the aid car with us, but we're going to look after you. And I need to do a bit of a intake here. And I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you some questions, and just know that we ask everybody these questions. So what is your legal name? Maybe that person will tell the truth, maybe they won't, depending, right? Or you could say, what's your name? You document their name. Is there any other name that you go by, or a legal name that we should be made aware of that is connected to health insurance or medical records, something like that? Number one, I want to make sure I'm referring to you by the name you go by. But nevertheless, I want to make sure that we're getting everything coming together. So that could be a step. You could certainly say, are there additional things that would be helpful for me to know about your medical history? For example, drugs. It's okay if they're illegal drugs. Don't worry about that. Gender. How about your gender history? We encounter, you don't even have to go into significant detail, but you can say, and gender, we encounter people of all genders instead of both genders. If I hear that, I'm already paying attention, because it says, oh, somebody said all genders instead of both genders. meaning they at least have awareness of maybe a more expansive understanding of gender. So I'm asking this question. For example, these are some of the things that people list. And then I'm going to feel a lot more confident to share. Interestingly, that whole pronoun thing is as simple and as frustrating and as whatever other adjective you want as it is. If somebody said, look, you know, just to make sure, I got your name, I got your legal name also, and what pronoun do you use? And if you say, again, you say, we ask these questions of everybody, then you're on your way. And I could say, well, I use he and him, or somebody could say, well, thanks, I use they and them. You know, try to use it afterwards if you can. And if you slip up, you know, just correct yourself and move on. But even at that very, that much alone is a start that sends a message to me that I feel that I can be a little safer. I spend a lot of time in my life, in just a second, I spent a lot of time in my life just trying to be healthy. And my poor wife, she's like, you know, you're not eating that. And, you know, we're going to make sure to do this. She's just like trying to keep me as healthy as possible because she's terrified of how the systems might treat me. I figure as long as I'm conscious and can talk about it, I will talk my way out of anything. But I'm not a cookie cutter version of a trans person. I go in knowing I'm going to educate just about any and every provider I ever encounter, ever. Trying to think, I might have one or two providers that I've encountered along the way that I thought, oh, these folks are looking after me. I don't have to do some explaining. Am I judgmental about that? Well, I'm not, because I understand the lay of the land. That where are these different providers getting this learning? Nowhere. The experts that exist out there are simply people who said, oh, you're a trans person? Oh, I don't know much about that. I think I'll go dig a little deeper. Go ahead.
Just back to the pronouns. If I have a patient or I encounter someone who I'm unsure how they identify, my default is they, them, because I feel like it covers a broader spectrum. Is that acceptable, or would it be more appropriate to ask them what their pronouns were, or is it acceptable to refer them as they, them? Since it's a little bit more of a slush bucket.
Well, you're going to get different opinions if you ask different people. So there's that fun. That said, I think that's a reasonable way to go. Our youth group director uses they and them pronouns for all his kids until he discovers what pronoun they actually use. And he lets them know that. So I don't think that's an unreasonable way to go. There, for every trans person that tells you that, there's another one that says, well, no, you should say it differently or whatever. So on that note, do you ask someone's pronoun? Well, if you do, ask everyone or don't. If you're looking at somebody and saying, oh, maybe this person is transgender or whatever, I notice that when people do that. So if you said, Aiden, I'm looking after you, I don't know, what's your name? Claire. My name's Claire. I use she and her pronouns. I want to find out some things about you. So I'm going to be asking you some questions too. What's your name? Do you have, again, that if you need a legal name, or I see that you have a different name on your identification card. I'm also looking for how to engage with you. So I shared she and her for my pronouns and what are yours? That might feel a little awkward to do it the first time or two, but you can get into a groove with that. If you're doing it first, again, I'm going to go, oh my God, Claire, I want Claire. Because right there, I just feel like I've got somebody that I can grab a hold of if I'm uncertain. Again, I'm going back to 4 years ago and thinking about that trans woman where somebody freaked out and wouldn't staunch her bleeding and she died. I don't, my hope and my heart and my optimism says that people are gonna look after me. But also the reality checks of what happens to any particular person when something unexpected shows up is a crapshoot, and I don't know how it's gonna play out. If Jim Carrey has to race to the bathroom to vomit, burn his clothes and sob because he kissed a beautiful woman, you know, that's some messaging that people receive. Yeah, I don't know if that's making sense. I want somebody that knows how to move through additional information that's unexpected. And you all do that. I don't need to know the ins and outs of your work world to know that that's absolutely a huge part of it. So if you're just considering that this piece is one also, great. The more confident you are to do that, what are the questions that you need to ask as you get more information, the better. So I'll give you an example of something that, you know, was okay, but not really how I would like it framed. I'm in to see a medical provider. It wasn't for any particular issue. I think I had moved to a new community and was establishing a relationship with a new doctor. But the person who does your vitals and whatnot at the beginning, does all that intake stuff. I can't remember how this led to it, but she said something and I said, oh, well, I'm transgender. So the body was female and, you know, the identity is male or whatever. And she's like, okay, so I don't know how to ask this, but are you sewn up down there? Is that a medical term? Down there? And it was just really telling. Like, she needed to ask, her next question had something to do with my body, but her ability to articulate it in any type of practical professional language escaped her in that moment. So nevertheless, you know, I like those kinds of things when they happen because I get to tell those stories. Sewn up down there. But really, I prefer not to experience those. I want somebody that can, even if they have to take a beat or two, that they can shift gears and go, oh, okay. I was in a car accident and had some lingering headaches, and I ended up going to a neurologist to chat with them about it. And this dude was so not interested in being there. And he was just kind of dismissive and I'm having headaches, right? And he says, oh, I guess, well, we can clip the nerve. Like, surely there are some in between approaches you can do before you just simply cut a nerve. But anyway, towards the end of the visit, he said, oh, and well, you know, you haven't had a hysterectomy. I filled out his form, right? And it says, have you had a hysterectomy? And I said, yeah. And so I said, well, actually, I know in this moment, okay, he has zero clue about what's happening here. So I'm going to take a moment and guide him through this. And I did. I explained that, you know, transgender person. Yes, I had a hysterectomy. Yes, it was in 2009 and da 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 da. And he just looks at me and he goes, oh, I just thought you were ignorant. Like, okay, well, oh, how could I not say, who's ignorant in this room? But somehow I refrained. I try not to judge because obviously that was his first time. And I filled out his form. So you want to learn something, you can, about somebody with intake forms, for example, you can put those things on the form that you want to see. So don't put hysterectomy under this section that says for women. If you want to know whether a human has had a hysterectomy, then have them check that box. What about if I'm pregnant? No. I don't know, I'm not a medically knowledgeable person, but I know that from any number of providers that I've engaged with, that sometimes there are questions about, is it possible you could be pregnant? Because it might influence their choices about tests or whatever procedures. So ask everyone. Or at least have it on the form or whatever that is. Hey, as a matter of fact, I had a part-time job for the census, right? We had to go to homes where people had not yet filled out their census form. And so we were instructed to ask questions. And one of them is, are you a man or are you a woman? And we were instructed, we were taught by the federal government that we would ask everyone that question. Don't skip over it. They told us that in training. Do not skip over that. Ask it. And if somebody says, well, it's obvious I'm a woman or man, whatever, just say, hey, no worries. We're required to ask this question. So thank you. And check, you get your answer. If you're communicating that to everyone in a very matter-of-fact way, then you're on your way. And again, if you're asking me, then I'm going to go, oh, somebody's thinking about my possible experience. And I'm going to feel a little bit more confident. And if I'm recalling, I think part of your question had to do with how do you engage somebody respectfully, not wanting to offend or disrespect or hurt someone's feelings or whatever. So I think, that's kind of getting at it. And I wonder, are there questions or things that you do that offend people as you're out there in the world?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. And so what do? Do you just figure out like how to address those and keep at what you are supposed to be doing, what you are there to do? And I imagine the answer is yes. So I don't know your name back there in the trouble corner. Jason. So say more if I didn't touch on things enough or.
I'm thinking about this morning. Yes, we could ask everybody that question. In reality, is it going to happen? Probably not. You have a limited period of time in order to interview this person, develop a control impression, try to go down the path in order for them to get the best care possible. And I was hearing what you were saying, how people, how they identify or people being shocked and that one provider that freaked out and that person died. We have those all over the place, all professionals. It's unfortunate. But when it comes down to it, when you have a critical patient in front of you, 98% of the time it's irrelevant what gender they are. But when we have those ones that are sick, but we have to go down the right path, the sooner we go down the right path, the better. This could be a female, biologically female type of a medical problem, or it could be a male type of problem. If we don't have correct information, we go down the wrong path, which will sometimes a poor outcome or an outcome that costs them a lot of money because they figured it out later. So I guess I'm just kind of reacting to some of the things that you said. But as far as answering or getting to the part where I have a person standing in front of me and I am unsure what gender they are.
Yeah.
And I have to engage with them and decide how do I engage with them. And I might get a name like Pat or Chris.
Right.
And I'm not sure still, but.
And I think it's reasonable to say, I'm just making sure I get this right. What pronouns do you use? If you don't want to do I'm Jason, I use he and him pronoun. I mean, you can do that and still say, and your pronouns are.
It's going to be hard. That's a hard habit to get into. Really, I think we're talking about 0.2% amount of people that I see
Right.
over the course of a year. So it's really, it's a very low frequency occurrence.
Yeah,
But when it does happen, it's has the potential to be embarrassing. And I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to be.
well,
Maybe.
worst case scenario, somebody's embarrassed. You're embarrassed. I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
Don't that embarrassment doesn't cause them to give you bad information that might lead to a bad.
Right.
And sometimes the information is critical and we know it right now. And it's not frequent. But when it comes down to, I guess when it comes down to it, if I'm, the medical provider that is delivering the care, I just want to make sure that they're confident in how to treat people. I don't care what gender they are. If they want to inform me of their situation, and that's obviously very helpful. If they don't, then they're impacting their own medical health.
Mhm. And they're doing it also out of a place of protection too, because those folks are busy hearing the same stories about people dying
Sure.
that I know about.
And listening to you talk, I appreciate how impactful this is to people's, I guess, frame of mind and the judgment that the majority of the people they talk to every day have.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Right. So the couple of things that you can do, while they might be awkward at first, they're not necessarily heavy lifts. I'm not going to tell you all what you have to do. I'm just going to offer suggestions that could be helpful. And I'm going to tell you that you're not going to get it right. Because you might have Aiden Key, who loves to chat about his gender and will happily ask the nurses afterwards who are taking care of me after my hysterectomy. I'm like, am I your first man with a hysterectomy? Ha ha ha, and they're all laughing. We're all laughing. I'm all doped up on anesthesia and I'm still doing it. Because I also am aware that it's very possible I'm making a first impression for an entire subset of a community. And so I want to facilitate that. If they have a chuckle, it relieves tension. If somebody goofs up my pronoun, oh well. But again, I have a really different way of navigating the world than most trans people. What if I live in a small community and people aren't aware that I'm transgender, and to do so would massively disrupt my life and perhaps put it in danger? Unfortunately, we live in this world and there are those situations where that could occur. So, if I'm that trans person who wishes to keep that private for my own safety, the safety of my family, the preservation of my career, whatever that is, my sense of belonging in that community, then I might lie and take my chances. It's a tough choice to be in. For me to figure out, is this, if I lie or wish to retain my privacy about this, is it going to cost me my life? But trust me, those are thoughts that go on. And there are repercussions, like you said. It might make things a lot more costly because that information could have been helpful at the beginning. But, sadly, unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And we're just going to do the best that we can. But again, if Clara's got a little sticker with her pronouns on it. I don't even know your pronouns. I didn't ask. I'm making assumptions.
It's a she.
Okay. That's going to send me a message. I've seen baristas with pronoun buttons. That's probably not part of your required uniform, I suspect.
Well, awareness is the first step.
Yeah. What I don't like is getting the frozen face. I can't compute. I can't comprehend what you're saying. And I've seen that face. I remember it was actually a manager of my apartment building I used to live in. He thought I was gay. He said, "Oh, I just assumed you were family," because he was a gay man. But I never thought to ask you, "So are you?" And I said, "Well, family, maybe not quite in the way that you were thinking." And I went on to say, "Well, I'm transgender and this is what this means. I started on the planet as female, but that wasn't right for me, blah, blah, blah." And I walk him through it, right? And the look, it's got to have a name, the look. But a really not computing. And so he went like that. He kind of like shake it off. My ears heard some words that made no sense. Those words had no place, no conceptual landing ground in his own mind. So he shook it off and said, I didn't hear what you said. So I slowed it down, said it again, and took longer to get there. I'm not judging him for that. And where is he supposed to grab that? If we're busy being told there's only XX and XY chromosomes, and that's not news. That's not theory. We have multiple chromosomal designations in human beings. We need that information. And so increasing awareness about the diversity we exhibit in our bodies, genitalia, neurobiology, endocrine systems, whatever. What do you need to know, and can you incorporate that? And I don't really know, but that understanding can and will show up. Okay, well, I've got Aiden here. He's bleeding out his anus, and do I need to know if he's pregnant or not? What is it that I need to know to be able to take care of him? You might be scratching your head, and maybe you'll come to a sense of, or an awareness that there's nothing. I'm having intestinal bleeding. So let's get him taken care of. That's the short of it, of what I need. And I would ask you to draw on some of these other examples that you've mentioned to see, are there strategies you employ now? If it's drugs, for example, how do you engage with somebody when you're trying to get that information immediately? And if you have ways of engaging with them, how do you do that so as not to offend, or I can't remember what all, but how do you engage with people in a respectful way that to gain information that they're really reticent to deliver? And that manner that you do that, would that work in this situation? Ultimately, if you can't tell someone's gender by looking at them, you're not the only one. There are other people. It's not likely the first or fifth or 18th time that person has had somebody ask. So go ahead and ask. Even if it's awkward, go ahead and ask.
Okay, what does that question look like? The least offensive way of phrasing that question that I need to know.
Well, tell me.
I mean, look and say, what are you? Where and how? What's the PC way?
Well, yeah. Well, the PC ways always change as well. So today, I'm not sure what the PC way is, but I'll do my best. Is to say, are there pronouns that you use? What are the pronouns you use?
So we also deal with an elderly population.
Yeah.
Do they understand that? Do they understand what pronoun? If I ask an elderly person,
Right.
what pronouns do you identify?
Right.
They're going to look at you like,
What do you mean?
what the F?
Yeah, you're right. And so, it's a good analogy. So do you hold off on asking pronouns because somebody's going to have a big question mark over here for certain reasons? All you need to do is tell this person, hey, look, we ask everyone these questions because we have medical information to gather. And sometimes we don't know the information we need simply by looking at somebody. And so we ask. So pronoun is a way to get to it, but there's also the physical anatomy. I can tell you he and him pronouns. You can look at me and decide that's a man and he's gonna have the equipment that I expect a man to have. And that's maybe information that you need to know, like, oh, actually his body is different. So how are you gonna find that out? Well, ultimately, I'm going to tell you. And again, I am not every trans person. So the other scenario I mentioned, which was somebody who's at risk in their community, if that information does get out, you may not get to know. Unless, well, I don't know, let me crowdsource. Yep.
I think there are so many variables to the question, because you keep saying ask their pronouns. If I ask you your pronoun and you're like, he, him, I'm gonna be like, okay, that's it.
Right.
And that does not tell me the story. So that, I mean, there may be situations where we see somebody and we may have to say, hey, you appear to be female to me. Were you born female? Like, what is the, you know, if that matters in that situation, which is pretty unlikely, but I think we spend so much time trying to avoid having uncomfortable conversations that we just don't ever get any answers, where some conversations are uncomfortable.
I think, yeah, and I think you gotta just embrace that.
Yeah.
I went to a clinic one time. My regular doctor said, oh, well, come see me at this clinic. I work there on Thursdays or whatever, and make sure you ask for me. Because she's being sensitive about the gender piece for me. Well, guess who didn't work that Thursday?
Yeah.
That I showed up. And so they hand me a form to fill out. One's blue, one's pink, right? They hand me the blue one. Okay, whatever, I fill this out. No. Actually, I might have said, I need the pink form because my insurance is under female. So I'm telling that to the person at the desk. So I fill that out. But that's not the person who is gonna do my exam. I'm out in the waiting room and they're calling people by number. So they say, you know, number whatever. And I go, yeah, that's me. Person looks at me. And she said, well, and what's your name? And I said, you know, my name's Aiden, whatever. And she said, or no. She asked for my number. Maybe I had a little ticket or something. I don't remember. But I said, yeah, that's my number. She wanted to see it. And then she goes, and so what's your name? And then she pulls her clipboard close just in case I try to, like, what am I doing? Right? And so I tell her, and she doesn't really know what to do in that moment, but she says, come with me. And she takes me around the corner, out of the crowded waiting room, takes me around the corner, and she says, well, what I really need to know is, do you have a penis or not? And so all I had to do was answer that question. And then boom, she got to work. Fantastic. Is that an ideal way to go about it? I have no idea, but it worked in that situation. So partly it's if you can manage the unexpectedness of information that you get, which you have any number of instances of doing anyway. If you can go, I don't really know, then think about that. She was respectful of my privacy and not having all of this play out in the waiting area. She needed to know, and I told her, and we had a really fantastic conversation for the rest of the visit. I ultimately got to go in and do training for their staff. And it's mostly just this, like, how do we get from a place of feeling stuck, like we don't know what to do, to at the very least just doing something. When it comes to emergency situations, you have my permission, just do something, whatever it is. And if it offends somebody and they're alive to bitch about it, fantastic. And then you can give them my phone number and I will field that call. I'm making light of it, but you get what I'm saying. I
We
hope.
can learn in the process.
Is he alive when he's dead?
Yeah.
I will do that.
Yeah, do it. Oh, man, watch me roll up my sleeves. Listen here. They're trying to save your life. Let them. Let them do it awkwardly if they need to. It's okay. Yeah,
I was just thinking about how you were saying that in other circumstances, we already are navigating stuff that we don't know. I think I find that a lot of times when you encounter somebody that's ingested drugs or been in a vehicle accident, when we tell them, you know, like, are you on any drugs? Are you intoxicated? And you can see that people don't want to tell you because they could get you in trouble. And I think a lot of times we would say, well, that stuff doesn't matter to me. I just need to know if you're medically okay.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that'd be an approach to it in that circumstance, saying
Yeah.
like, I'm not really concerned about your pronouns or anything. I just need to know medically for this exam so that I can do a good job.
Yep.
And would that be like an appropriate way to say that? No, that I hate to make someone mad that I say that stuff isn't important, but
right.
you know,
Well-
because it is important to the individual. But is that an okay to say? I don't care about that really. I just need to know about the medical side of things.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I'd probably tweak the language a little bit and say, really, thank you for sharing. You know, any information that you want to share will stay with me. And if there's information that you want to share that you want me to keep private, let me know. And I will be able to do that to an extent, but I'm really looking after you and your body. So, if it's necessary, medically necessary for us to look after you in the best way we can, I need to know that information, share that with me. And I think that somebody would respond well if you're looking at them and saying, I'm just trying to do the best job. And it sounds to me, it sounds a little better if you said, hey, I'm really wanting to make sure I'm taking care of you and your body, rather than, oh, I'm just trying to do my job, which wasn't quite what you were saying. But there's that type of approach. If somebody's in a medical emergency situation, they're scared. So how do you calm them down? How do you reassure them? All of those tools are available to you. Pull them out, use them. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think this stuff is really rocket science once you start thinking in that way. Well, this is what I say in this situation. This is what I say over here. So I'll try it out. I'm trying, I mean,
I have a question.
yeah,
When you were transitioning, I'm probably gonna say something,
oh, hit me.
but you.
Come on, do it.
You appear decidedly male to me. So, I would guess that when you began transitioning, it wasn't always as obvious as it is now that you're male.
Right.
Have you noticed a different reaction now as to when you explained to people that you weren't born a male, as opposed to when you were younger and look
Like that?
Yeah, well.
Do you see that rocking
were you
hair?
transitioning
I miss the hair.
Were you transitioning at that point?
Yeah,
Okay,
probably 6 months to a year on a low dosage of testosterone.
yeah, if I was speaking to you at that point and you said my pronouns are he, him, then I might be like a little bit, oh, we're now, you know, I'm just curious about the difference in reaction that you've noticed with people over the years as you've transitioned and how that has occurred.
Well, I tell you what, I told you about my identical twin sister, right? So these two little clones of each other, the question of is gender or nature based or nurture? Well, here we are, you know, having the same experience on either end. We, same genetic makeups, raised in the same environment, but two pretty different experiences in life. That kid, my sister, could not peel herself away from a mirror if her life depended on it. As a young adults, if we're going out somewhere to go dancing, 3 hours of preparation. I wouldn't even bother to look in the mirror because what I end up seeing in the mirror didn't look like me. So I thought, well, why bother? You know, like I might make sure my hair was looking pretty awesome or something, but.
I bet you were killing it when you were younger.
Okay, right? But, when I look like that, I loved looking at myself in the mirror. When I looked in the mirror, I said, finally, there you are. And that was the time when I didn't know what pronouns people would throw out. They were all over the map. Some people saw me as male, some people saw me as female, but I finally felt like, there's my gender. And a couple of times, more than once, walking down the street and have somebody holler, hey, Fabio. I thought, I don't know. Do you know who Fabio is? Some
Most of us do.
romance novel cover model kind of thing. You gotta unbutton the shirt and have the big pecs out and everything. And I couldn't deal with everyone's daily distress. I thought, well, shoot. I mean, as much as I'm happy to see me, I don't feel like I want to deal with that day in, day out, moment by moment crap from everyone else. Simply, I mean, not because people were trying to be jerks, but just because it was attention getting and their curiosity would overcome them. And people stop me at a street light. Do you know what this is? Unroll the window. Nobody does it that way anymore. Are you a man or a woman? You have to find out before the light changes. They're never going to see me again, and they needed to know bad enough to stop me at the intersection. So I thought, well, I either continue to move forward or I step back. And so this is a story I share with a lot of families too, because going back to that, what if this is a phase? What if they change their mind kind of question? I took a low dosage of testosterone for a year before I got to a place where I felt like I needed to make a decision. You're going to continue forward and present as more and more as male, or you're going to step back and go with what was familiar. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but what I want to share in all of this is that I wished that it didn't matter what everyone else thought, but it does. Because part of the thing that got me to a place of being able to have the courage to step forward was when I thought, okay, I'm on a deserted island. I'm never going to see anybody ever again. What do I want to do about my body? And I thought, yeah, I do want to look, I want my gender to show. I would want to take testosterone. I had chest surgery. Like, yeah, I wasn't happy about those little breasts when they were showing up at 11. And when they were gone, no looking back. There was no grief there. So I thought, okay, I'm on a deserted island and that works for me. That sort of helped, but it's not enough because I don't live on a deserted island. I live in a world, in a community, and with family and friends, and what they think matters and how I move through the world. The short period of time, few months, I think roughly, of really being in this more gender ambiguous place, the attention was really intense. And sometimes it came manifested in all these different ways. The desire to look at my genitals, from, strangers wanting to look, people wanting to have some type of sexual experience simply because that I looked unusual to them. Also anger. Anger because people couldn't tell. I had a officer pull me over for having a tail light or blinker or something not working. And I hand over my driver's license. And I think I might have switched it to male by then. And that dude got mad because he perceived me as female. And he thinks I'm, back to that theme of just being deceptive. He thinks I'm trying to pull something over the wool over someone's eyes for some reason that is not good and not legal. So he starts on me right away. And I said, well, at what point in this traffic stop am I supposed to tell you I'm transgender and that this is my process. Because once his anger was showing up, I started explaining really quick. And I said, when am I supposed to share that with you? It's a blinker. And he goes, it was almost like he snapped out of it. And he said, I see your point. I get it. Thank you. Get your blinker fixed. Have a great night. Those moments are the ones that we can get stuck on and that can turn an everyday situation into a crisis or a dangerous situation. And that's no joke. So offend me by asking pronouns rather than throwing cuffs on me and taking me in because you think I'm doing something illegal, or not treating me because you're freaked out about my body or things that you discover. That's the moment we're in right now. And less so, 25 years ago, whatever, the familiarity that people had about trans people was a lot lower. Now, I mean, really, pull up the news and see if you don't see a transgender article about Texas and what they're up to. I don't know, I could go there, but yeah, yep.
So I have a 14-year-old daughter who is a cis female, but she is not straight, and that has presented itself in different ways over the last couple of years. And she recently was having her birthday party, so gave me a list of people that she wanted to have with her and stay the night.
Yeah, stay the night.
So for the sleepovers, like, we're still trying to navigate this as a family. She's like, well, who can stay the night? And I said, well, anybody who has he, him pronouns or has a penis cannot stay the night. Like that. And, you know, this of course starts a fight with a teenager. Where I'm like, well, I don't know how to navigate this, like trying to figure this out as a parent. And even because she's not straight, I'm even like, well, you obviously can have sleepovers, you know, with your friends, but, you know, she's not straight. So all these girls coming to stay the night, trying to figure out the boundaries as a parent and how to navigate these things that are a real challenge for us. And she is not as tolerant as you are, so I'm super glad. Like when you were talking about the cranky teenage reaction, like I get a lot of that.
Yeah.
But just trying to navigate those things has been really challenging.
So let me say that I think that one of the most fundamental pieces to consider is that your children and more broadly speaking, those younger generations are stepping into the world and they're going, yeah, gender identity. Of course. And their understanding of it is there, and they are deeply impatient with my generation's inability to understand that. It's a significant game changer. If I do anything in my work world, it's trying to bridge those things. And especially for my peers, you know, my age range folks, because I get it. I lived it, I breathed it. You know, what I had to do to try to stretch gender just so I could fit in was significant and felt uncomfortable, and so many of the things that I mentioned. So the work that I do in schools, for example, is helping a lot of older generations wrap their mind around what those students are up to. Gender identity, you know, if you have a sleepover and you're busy saying, so it's just all girls, that's how it's going to go. Well, so obviously you're okay with the girls that have the penis, right? Well, yeah, but your daughter, say your daughter's a lesbian and the transgender girl's a lesbian also. Well, then, you know, you got some romance going on there, because no, then you can't spend the night. But if it's just a best bud and the lesbian daughter is totally into cisgender guys, then the transgender girl could be totally fine. So as a matter of fact, so this question comes up a lot in schools because they have overnight trips. And, what do we do about that? Well, we separate by boys and girls. Okay, tell me why you separate by boys and girls. What are you hoping to accomplish? Well, we just don't want any hanky-panky going on. Okay, so you're fine with girls hanky-pankying around with other girls? It's okay if boys get it on? Is that what you're saying? And people often will look at me really shocked and say, well, no, I didn't mean that either. Okay, well, we separate by boys and girls. Are you trying to ensure that they don't get pregnant? Well, that's a reasonable goal, I think.
Let's see.
If your ultimate goal is, hey, not on our watch, you're not getting pregnant on my watch, then figure out, you can separate by body parts if you want. Who can impregnate whom? And keep those ones separate. But if it's the hanky-panky piece, then, not so much. So what I often advise schools to do is to say, if you understand that there are relationships between different students, then your sleeping arrangements, you separate the two that you think are in a relationship. It doesn't matter what their parts are, their gender. We don't want you making out or more while you're under our care.
And even then, understand that they're gonna find a way.
They're kids.
Yeah.
They're kids.
There's
They're
that.
kids, yeah.
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 Yeah. But on the flip side, I don't have as much opportunity to engage with younger people and younger gender diverse people. But when I do, sometimes I do a little, gentle reading of the Riot Act. So for example, I showed you that clip from the National Geographic thing about the brain cells and studies and all of that are occurring. They watched that special. We had a viewing for parents and youth. We watched the whole documentary. Those kids ripped it apart. Oh, I can't believe it. If this was a drinking game, we'd all be on the floor wasted at every sort of simplistic way of looking at something or, just that. And meanwhile, the parents are in there going, well, I kind of enjoyed it. It was helpful to me. I got to tell those young people, this documentary is not made for you. Those kids, those teenagers, your kid would rip me a new one for the simplistic way that I set this up. Oh, 4 concepts. Are you kidding? Sexual orientation? You didn't even talk about romantic attraction. You didn't even talk about who I might want to have a relationship with. That all might be different. You can't make a line with female on one end and male on the other end. That's a binary way of looking at gender. Like, well, trust me, I'm talking to people who look at gender in a very binary way. So while your brain is all going expansive, the structure of the world, the systems of the world are still very, very binary representation. I want them to understand that as well, so that they know better how to engage of different generations to find their way, and not be one of those people who might get really worked up or offended because you goofed on a pronoun. I mean,
You think
yeah.
that, circling back to something you said earlier, where you don't see this as possibly being trendy, like the group of friends that my daughter has at school, it seems that maybe it is kind of trendy. There's kids named Ghost and Jazz and these different things that you can't really identify anything about them by their name, and like I try to be respectful to her as much as possible, like he said earlier, and I think I always was male and I've always been straight. I don't ever remember making a decision on going one way or the other. So understanding that for myself kind of makes me understand for her that if she is questioning it, then she's always going to question. But it does appear that it is kind of cliquish or trending amongst a group of kids at that age.
Yeah, yeah. So I absolutely do not disagree with you. When I say the trendiness, what I'm thinking is the journey that somebody might make, considering not just names and pronouns, but stepping into medical intervention and possible surgical intervention and things like that. That's a progressive and lengthy journey that is not for the faint at heart. But, you know, can teens be influenced by other teens? I'd be a fool if I said no.
I think they certainly can, but, and granted, this was eons ago, but I think back to my own high school experiences, and there were cliques like Goes to Light. I mean, there was a reason all the drama kids hung out together. There was a reason that they had.
Right.
And so I think that's part of it too, that group of kids can relate to each other. Not that
Right.
they're necessarily influencing each other, but they relate.
Right, right. That's what those years are about. Those middle school and high school years is finding your peeps, finding your tribe. And the tribe that you find in high school may not be your tribe later. So if that tribe is busy being all gender expansive and whatever, does that mean they're transitioning? Well, no, not necessarily. And that is actually one of the things that's a little challenging for me to figure out how to best articulate. Let's see if I can do it now. If we have what amounts to a paradigm shift in our understanding of gender, and simply by adding this notion of gender identity, that it's not just your genitalia or your chromosomes, but that you can have a sense of your own gender, whether you want to call it your brain or your heart or, you know, whatever. If we make room for that, then we're making room. I don't know how many people are on the planet. 8 billion? Too many. We have too many gender categories because then we're saying any person can define their own gender. The younger generations don't have a problem with that. And that trend is continuing. That expansive mindset is continuing. And, you know, fold your arms and say, I don't like this, I don't agree. And guess what? You can do that. And your children and your grandchildren and your neighbors' children and your siblings' children and whoever are going to move you forward regardless, because they're busy doing that. They're busy taking this more expansive mindset and wondering, what's your problem, boomer? What's going on? You know, snap out of it. So ultimately, we have to take a look at that. And if that gender expansive mindset exists, and so many people will say, yeah, well, it's never worked for me either. There are things in life that if I'm a person who's not transgender, but got shut down as a kid because of interests that I had. Oh, you can't do that because you're a boy. You can't do that because you're a girl. Guess what word our little childhood minds came up with? That's not fair. That's not fair. So these kids are not doing anything terribly different. They're just wanting to be themselves in a world that wants to divide and separate and whatever. So if they're creating this more gender expansive world, does that, and more of them embrace different pronouns and especially they and them in terms like non-binary, does that mean all of them are moving through a gender transition like what I've done? No, absolutely not. They're just saying, I want more room and I'm going to make more room. And too bad if you can't keep up. The impatience of youth is pretty significant. So I do think there's what we could call a trend with all capital letters. And if I wanted to stop it, you know, too bad. I get steamrolled. Doesn't matter what I think or what any of you think. Things are changing, and what do those changes really mean? ultimately, in my journey, with educators or with these families, it comes down to, guess what? You're parenting a teenager. So lucky you. Doesn't matter that it's the gender piece is part of it. Can you separate things out and say, oh, well, is this part of being transgender or is this part of being a teenager? The answer is yes or no. It's difficult to separate those things out. So how do we step in with people who are going through that process of personal discovery? I couldn't figure out how to move forward. I had, my epiphanous moment, aha, the word transgender show up in my brain. Also touched with, that's not exciting news. It's really profound news. And I don't want to be one of those people. Wow, what do I do with that? Where do I put that? Ultimately, I had to make decisions along the way about reconciling my own internal biases that I didn't adopt willingly. They just were infused in our culture. So what do I do about that? How do I move forward? And what it took for me was to be able to step in. I couldn't even decide about testosterone. Take that or not? Everybody said, oh, it's a big deal. You have to be really certain that this is the right thing for you to do. Okay, how do I do that? How do I know? The future as a trans person, when I would try to imagine it, no way. Absolutely, utterly impossible to picture it. It was just darkness. May as well have been trying to move through a dark cave without a candle or anything. But I eventually gave myself permission to dip my toe in the pool. Well, why can't I try just a little bit of testosterone and see what that feels like? What changes do I notice? Do I like those changes? As my presentation starts changing, how are people interacting with me? How do I feel about those interactions? What do I discover? What do I learn? And that's what helped me move forward. And so that's the environment I want for any person exploring their gender, is to be able to get more information rather than less. Because the less part doesn't work. They'll hunker down. And I don't want a kid saying, I'm transgender. I want, this is my new name, my new pronoun. I want testosterone and I want chest surgery and I want it all by next week, end of story. And that may not be that kid's journey really. Because not super often, but every once in a while, there's a kid that demands all those things and wants to move forward and then says, oh, well, maybe not quite that far. I like this. Actually, the name of pronoun was really a good fit for me, but I'm not so sure about testosterone. I want that kid working with a provider that gets that piece also and says, oh, okay, let's back up. Let's pause things for a while. Hormones are part of this journey. So at some point, leaning this way or leaning that way, we're going to have to make a commitment, but there's no hurry. You're 13 years old, you're 15 years old. Let's go this way. What are you discovering? If you have to step back, what are you discovering in that process? Do you say, well, gosh, maybe I want to go through this female puberty, and that female puberty begins again. How are you feeling about that? So that it's a good, informed, and incremental step-by-step journey. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think when we go on calls and we're talking to people and they're having certain issues going on, maybe chest pain or whatever, I think it's important to obviously be highly respectful, but have a starting point and an ending point.
No, 1 second.
Okay.
Some people are going, bye. Okay, start over.
Yeah, so when we're doing our patient care, to be incredibly respectful, when we're asking all these questions, because as we're moving forward, if I was to go on a call with you, there's a bunch of different things that could happen, right? You're taking testosterone now, so now your blood's a little thicker. You're technically, in some aspects, still have. Wow. Other things that can affect you, such as being physically making the transition, chest pain. Women usually have silent MIs. If you're younger, ectopic pregnancy, things like that, where, just being highly respectful, asking the question like you normally do, and just being human. I mean, where it comes to, but for our EMTs and our paramedics, we go on calls and we're going to see, I mean, everybody out there, that those are the questions that we had to put in our little toolbox to say, hey, what we're seeing might not be what we're seeing. And good communication and being highly respectful and trying to figure out, if our EMTs get on scene first saying, hey, something's not, adding up, what could be going on? Is he, but physically is she having abdominal pain? Has she had sex? It could be, like I said, it could be the ectopic pregnancy. So you almost got to sit back a little bit and take all the big picture in and then go forward with it. And yet do it in a way that's respectful, and like we normally do. But I think that's another takeaway from all this as well.
I think your point of, like, if you're taking in information and stuff's not adding up, and you can say stuff's not adding up. And maybe the gender piece is one thing that you think, I wonder if this could be a factor.
Right.
And maybe you're able to say, hey, there are often additional factors that come into play, like potential pregnancy.
Yeah, ectopic pregnancy where it could be life threatening.
Right.
Silent MI, especially with women, it could be like a toe pain, and literally they're having a huge MI. And you've seen lots of those over the years. So there's a lot of different aspects of thinking as an EMT or a paramedic going to these houses and asking those questions, but being, we all go on calls and ask some incredibly strange questions because people do weird things in general, just in general. So it's just, I think for our EMTs and paramedics, just asking those questions in a respectful way, you'll get farther down.
Right. Well, gender is a really convenient shorthand for narrowing things down. Female, all of those things I don't need to do. I've got my information. This person's male.
Right.
But if you can realize that you shouldn't write off everything, at least, think, oh, wait a minute, maybe I better look back in that pile.
Yeah.
Is a good start. Just like that person at the beginning I talked about who has androgen insensitivity syndrome, she was advised to zip her lips and not talk about it ever. So how does that work for her health? She spent 15 years not talking about it and about destroyed her. She stepped forward and began raising that visibility of people who also had AIS so that they wouldn't be in the same positions as her. So that if they were parents of that child, those parents could recognize what she needed, and a less stigmatized environment.
Right.
So, with this issue, can we do the same? I think we can. Take a photo. If you ever see me in the back of a vehicle, like, oh, that's Aiden. Let's remember some things about him. He's had a hysterectomy.
Right.
I don't know exactly what your solutions are, but I do believe that you have a lot of tools in the tool bag that you can look at and see, hey, are these applicable? Can we consider a way, or at least a partial way, that this might help us? How do we gain information when people are hesitant to disclose for reasons that we may know or we may not know?
Right.
Then you're on your way. And frankly, I just think if I see a loving, compassionate face that's worried about me, I soften up a lot. Oh, they care. And I'm going to be more trusting. So we've got a little bit of time left. Are y'all hanging in there? There's a few more things. I'm trying to remember. We had somebody said, are you going to talk about blah, blah, blah after lunch? What was that? Who was that? Locker rooms or something?
Well, I brought up, I asked if, where like at the pool or the pool stop. So
That's
we
right.
obviously look opposite the gender that locker room is for.
Right, thank you. There was something. So a number of years ago, maybe 5, 6, something like that, it made national news that a man walked into a locker room or something, or the bathroom at Green Lake in Seattle at one of the public facilities. And so this dude just walks in there and nobody did anything. And it was pretty distressing. And the fear is that if we stop this person and say, hey, excuse me, women's bathroom here, women's facility, that somehow someone would be liable for discrimination or whatever. That is the concern. And that is where, well, how are we supposed to know? Especially if, we're humans and we can wear what we want to wear. And suppose this person is a transgender woman and she just happens to be in jeans and a t-shirt that day. And she just happens to look more like a man. How are we supposed to know? Well, you don't get to know. So my advice is, if you see a man go into a facility that's for women, that you intervene. And say, excuse me, did you know this is the women's restroom or this is the women's locker room? And that person, like this fella at the Green Lake pool, was just trying to prove a point. He was just stoking the fires of bathroom scare discussions that were happening all across the nation and wanting to prove that girls and women were unsafe in these facilities if we were to continue with gender identity protections. The fact of the matter is, sexual assault is a significant, outrageous problem all across the nation, all across the world. So if you're concerned that somebody's going to do something inappropriate, then intervene and say, hey, are you aware, are you walking into the women's room? Excuse me. And that person, how they respond is going to tell you a lot. They may say, well, yes, I am aware. Okay, you might then respond, well, then why are you doing it? And then that person may say, well, I identify as female, I'm a trans woman, and this is the best bathroom or locker room that I need to use. Okay, well, you have more information than you did at the outset. Now, if you think somebody's trying to do something, here's worst case scenario, is that you call the police or you call the security or whoever and let someone else handle it. If that person is a transgender person, it's probably not the first time they've dealt with that. And so, yeah, they might be pretty darn upset. But if the impetus is to ensure safety, to me, that tops the list. Where was it? Somewhere over in the Kitsap area. It's funny because in my work, there's definitely some direct calls that come about because of a particular student or a particular situation. And this district said, hey, I wonder if, while you're over here, can you stop by? There's a few of us that would like to have a meeting. Nobody ever asks me just to swing by. And so I'm wondering, like, what's going on here? And when I sat down with these administrators, it immediately went to locker rooms. And so it was an example like that. How do we know? How do we know this person is a transgender woman or not? And we played it out. So every part of the scenario that they would bring up, I would address it and they go, yeah, but what if? And carry it out. And so I kept following them with that and said, okay, in this situation, this is how you address that worst case scenario. You end up saying, I'm really sorry to have bothered you. I was just trying to make sure. I imagine this has been a bit distressing for you, and I hope it doesn't ruin your day. But the reality of what was going on in this district was that there was a person in the community that was threatening to go into the girls' locker room to prove to everyone else how at risk these young girls were. He was going to do whatever he needed to do, and if that meant throwing on a dress to do it, he was going to prove that this was a poor path. And I told these administrators, you call the police and let him try that logic out with them and see how that works. I watched every person in that room with me that day take a big breath and let it out. They were so relieved that they could act. And that's what I care about most. You know, what happens, I don't know. But ultimately, I think that we can, if the real question is, how do we keep girls and women safe in public facilities? I'm ready to have that conversation. And I think we can do it without pointing to trans people. Statistically, if you want to know who suffers the most in bathrooms and locker rooms, it's trans people. They get attacked. It's just, I mean, it's clear, it's obvious. Have people dressed in a different way to assault someone? Go find those stories if you can. And if you do, let me know. Because in the, I don't remember how many states, 15, 16 states where protections exist, as well as many other municipalities across the country. There's no instances of situations where somebody dressed as a woman to then attack another woman to sexually assault them. So I think it's, what's my point there? If we're busy thinking about the character from Silence of the Lambs, being a transgender woman and being a dangerous individual, and that's our association, then yeah, keep them out of the locker rooms, keep them out of the bathrooms. Warning, warning, warning. But those are the realities. Other thoughts? If you have them, pipe up.
What about trans athletes?
Yes.
We're starting to see more and more records being shattered by trans athletes.
Yeah.
They're now competing in women's sports, specifically the Olympics.
I have a lot to say about that, and I have 16 minutes to do it. So I'm going to do it. And I'm glad you brought it up. Let me start by giving a little backstory. Washington Interscholastic Activities Association, WIAA for short, stepped in 14 or 15 years ago to look at gender inclusive policy for the state, K through 12 schools. And I was there, as well as a good dozen other people, a whole passel full of attorneys, some from the ACLU, some from other entities, all having differing thoughts on how to do this. Some were talking about, oh, well, you know, body mass index, you know, let's police it this way. And they didn't use the word police, the ACLU. Let's think about this sort of packaging and whatever, and all these sorts of parameters. And I said, you know what, these aren't going to work. These are not going to work, because no matter what you do, if you are leveling some sort of body criteria, then you're going to be discriminatory. So if you're looking at a student that has a body mass index, I don't even hardly know what that is, but say it's too high to participate with the girls. What about the girl who's not transgender, who happens to be a rock? Does that mean she doesn't get to participate on the girls' teams? You know, where are you going to find these lines? Where are you going to draw them? And so what I proposed to them was, let's just build a policy that the person participates based on their gender identity. And so that 14 years ago, everybody said, okay, and did this, kind of crossed their fingers. Let's see how that goes. What they also built into place was a review process. So if there was some question about eligibility, that they could assess situation by situation to see. So number one, what they wanted to see was would somebody say, yeah, well, I identify as a girl because I'm interested in breaking all these records and or getting a scholarship or whatever. So they didn't want any situation like that to occur. So this review committee could assess those situations. All right, so fast forward after 14 or 15 years of implementation, what happened? Well, number one, what happened was it was the first policy of its kind in the US. And after that amount of time, there was one case that came up for review. That one case turned out to be a young high school age transgender girl participating on the track team. And the eligibility challenge was from not from her school, but from a competing school, and said, you know, hey, look, this kid's not eligible. The review committee said, well, gosh, you know, we're going to interview her. I got pulled back in with a few of the WIAA folks, and we had a conversation, and they just said, she's where she belongs. Her coach showed up, her teammates wrote letters in support of her and said, she belongs with us. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there's always the question of the athletic superiority of transgender girls because of their biology, their journey physically. And what I remember this young woman saying was, well, she goes, I do okay. I'm ranked about 37th in the state. And I thought, well, that's not in the top 5. That's not in the top 10. It's not the top 20. 37th, okay. So what it said to me is that she does all right, and girls can compete. So there's this question, number one, that trans girls are just going to automatically win. And what's happening over this decade and a half is that's not playing out. So there's that part of the story. Now, stepping into how has that impacted the athletic directors across the state? And they're dealing with different situations about where athletes on which team these athletes participate. And how about trans girls? And how about non-binary athletes? When your teams are boys and girls, you know, how does that work out? And we are sorting those questions out. That team came together again to evaluate that policy and say, how's it holding up now? And there were some changes that were made. The core elements of it were still, you know, we'll let them participate based on their gender identity. College and professional athletics, I don't know. I have my thoughts and I have my feelings. And I think about Leah Thomas, might be the person that you were referring to, a swimmer?
Yep.
Does that sound right? Somebody who competed on the collegiate level and did really, really well on the men's team, and then transitioned and now competes on the women's team and is busting all these records. You know, I'll be honest, unlike the whole rest of the day that we've been here together. I will say that I was a little peeved. And partly I was just thinking, why now? Why do you need to do this right now? When the lives of these younger trans young people are, where this question is a massive, massive debate. You're basically feeding the fire. And I don't know what to say about that. The college level and professional level and the Olympic Committee level criteria, they do step in and have criteria based on bodies, based on hormonal interventions specifically. And it's anywhere from a year to 3 years. It might vary sport by sport. Leah should take estrogen. I think she'd been on estrogen for a year. And she's still coming in and doing some serious butt kicking. So, you know, as far as making progress in hearts and minds, I'm a little dismayed about that. Will trans women come to dominate all aspects of women's sports? Well, no, I don't think so. But time will go by and we will learn more. And I know that on those upper levels of athletics where the competition piece is far more valued than K through 12, where it's more about participation, camaraderie, learning to participate on teams, those goals for the kids are a little bit different than the loftier goals of the professional athletes or the collegiate level athletes. So I'm still busy sorting out my feelings about that. And I think, well, what does it come down to? When the folks at WIAA and I reconvened to look at the state's policy and make some adjustments, I said, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we pull together a toolkit for the athletic directors all across the state? Because they are facing these questions and we all need help and guidance. So why don't we share the success and the journey? And we did that. We pulled that toolkit together. It's mostly addressing questions like, well, what if this were to happen? What if that were to happen? How do we manage this? And they took it to the National Athletic Directors Conference. And those folks they had a packed room when they presented on that. And everyone all over the nation is saying, can we borrow this? Is this working? How is it going? I don't know if there's a point I'm trying to make, except to say we're in a process of discovery. And I think that matters. And I think it's important to be attentive. And I think it's important to evaluate and reevaluate. The revisions to the Washington State policy were not much. It was, hey, we didn't talk about non-binary people. I think we should definitely mention that because that's really becoming more and more visible. I think one of the athletic directors said, hey, look, in no other situation does a student athlete need to come and defend their eligibility. Once they're determined eligible by their school, that's the end of the story. No other situation does another school get to challenge it. So the one case that did occur, they decided that's ridiculous. We can't do that. And so that some tweaks happened. And then they sent it out because across the state because they have to vote and approve this. And so we all kind of wonder, well, how's all this going to go? If you're thinking, well, nobody looked at this for 15 years, then it could be a whole new batch of folks, a whole new set of circumstances, except that all across the state and whatever parts of the state, regardless of politics or anything like that, they unanimously approved it. There was no other measure in all of their policies that they put forth, their policy revisions, where it was unanimous approval. So in some respects, it was this real blanket blessing, like this is helping us to know this stuff. This is helping us to have this type of examination in place. We pulled that toolkit together, and interestingly enough, the Sounders wanted to endorse it. They said, yeah, we have to stop underestimating our young girl and women athletes. They can kick butt. The trans girl is just another goal to reach, right? We need to stop assuming that girls and women can't excel athletically in this way. The Seahawks signed on, the Mariners signed on, the Kraken. Every professional team in the city of Seattle said, we want in on this in terms of engaging young people as much as possible to participate. So that's a kind of a long roundabout way of saying it's an interesting question. And it's an interesting question that is coming up nationally. And some states, I'm not sure which, I should remember this stuff. I feel like maybe Idaho maybe South Dakota, have said transgender girls specifically, transgender girls cannot participate on girls' teams. Okay. The people who are discussing that are the people least in the know about how it actually plays out. So I would love that discussion to occur more and more so that we consider that. How does this play out? That one student in 15 years of time whose eligibility got questioned, she talked about how her track teammates said, you have to come into the locker room with us, because she was scared to go in. Not that the whole team was scared that she comes in. And they invited her in. They celebrated her participation in their role, and they didn't seem to be distressed at all about what that would do to the competition. The question of bodies shows up, right? If you have exceptional athletic abilities and you move through a testosterone-based puberty, and those skills are even more enhanced, how does that compare to those who don't move through that puberty? Well, there are differences, and we can generalize. But I'm thinking about an article I read for the Portland women's basketball team, the Portland Ducks. This article, Sabrina Ionescu, this really celebrated athlete. This whole article is like, oh my gosh, we're so excited. Instead of going pro, she wants to play a 4th year on college, and everybody's celebrating. Her stats for rebounds, assists, and free throws have surpassed all records for collegiate athletes, men or women. She's just a rock star. And I'm reading this article about this big celebration of this awesome athlete, and I'm thinking, holy crap, what if she were a trans girl or a trans woman, because she's all grown up? What if this was an article about a trans woman? There's no way this thing would be celebratory. The clamorings of unfair physical advantage would show up right and left. But nobody's worrying about Sabrina's unfair physical advantage. And compared to a lot of women athletes, yeah, you could look at it as being unfair. I play basketball, I'm 5'6". You know, Sabrina at 6, whatever, 3. It's not fair. So I have thoughts about it, right? And I have feelings about it, and it's complicated. But I do think that deciding blanketly that these girls can't participate, so not the right way to go. Because there's so many young trans people today who have earlier intervention and do not get that physical advantage from a testosterone-based puberty. If Leah, I'm not sure how old she is, but let's just say she's 23 years old. She's had a lifetime of training, opportunity, physical changes, competing on the collegiate level on the men's team. Her experience is nowhere near the little 5-year-old trans girl who I know who's now 14 years old, who's never gone through what we consider a male puberty. She's never gone through that. Are we going to tell her she can't play? Well, that's basically what these efforts are trying to accomplish. And you just can't broad stroke it. So how's that? Some thoughts.
Yeah.
I want to say, I don't know if it's fair to say I was 15 minutes late, so let me take a few more minutes of your time, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I want to talk about faith. My journey with respect to faith, I talked to you about when I was 9 years old and I was in church, and I had this awareness and realization. I knew at 9 years old that I better keep my mouth shut about it. But I couldn't have told you why. I just knew that nobody would understand. And they might look at me and think, something's wrong with this kid. So I zipped it and I did my best to pretend to be a girl and a woman in the world. It didn't work very well for me. And by the time I got to high school, I was just busy drinking a lot and whatever else was available. And I knew also that that's not who I am, that someday I was gonna have to face the music and think about who am I on the planet. And that meant also thinking about my relationship with faith and my upbringing and what I was taught and learned and what I embraced in my heart. And so at some point into my early 20s, I finally said, okay, time to do this. And I stopped and I just said, you know, what are you supposed to do? Well, you know what you're supposed to do. You do what folks have taught you. You don't know the answer to something, you turn it over to God and you pray about it. And guess what? You don't wait for the answer that you want. Cross your fingers. You wait for the answer that comes. And I had to get to a place of saying, well, what if the message that comes back to me is one that says, you don't live this life. This is not in my vision, not my plan, not part of God's plan. And I got to a place of saying, you know, if that means that I have to live alone, if that means that I just figure out how to negotiate this and try to stay on the planet, then that's what that means. And so I prayed and prayed, and I did that, turning over to God. And the message I got back consistently over and over time was that God has a purpose for me, and I'm supposed to be authentic, and I'm supposed to be honest and truthful and share that. And, you know, here I am doing just that. I feel that if I were to step out that door and a big bus runs me over, or, you know, whatever were to happen, and I were to die and go and meet my maker today, I know that I could stand there and say, how'd I do? And I think that the answer that I would get back is, you did an excellent job. I have since discovered, I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch, but I have found some verses that address gender, not sexuality. I'm not going there. I have my own thoughts about it, but I'm not going to arm wrestle somebody about whether they feel that gay or lesbian people are being immoral or not, or whatever. I'm busy trying to navigate my life. I'm busy trying to navigate my relationship with God, and I'm trying to be the best human being I can possibly be. And when I've looked at some of those verses about gender, the only way the Bible references people with gender differences is that term eunuch. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but there's a few Bible verses in there. And I was pretty blown away by, well, one of them, it just says, you know, hey, eunuchs exist, and some are made by man, some are self-made, and some are made by God. Meaning, I think, if we're looking at the term eunuch as being maybe those intersex differences, that God's hand is in that creation. That if somebody is more self-made, like moving through a gender transition, that God's hand is in that too. There's no judgment attached to those verses. There's also some other verses in the Bible that say, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it to memory, but it says something along the lines of, to those eunuchs who follow my ways and keep my Sabbaths, unto them, I give them something like a place in heaven. And I give to them a place in heaven that is better than of sons or of daughters. And wow, rock my world. That's a pretty powerful verse. So I'm not going to enter into biblical debate with folks because, you know, we can debate how many angels can sit on the head of a pin or, you know, whatever, any number of things, and we'll get nowhere. But I am trying to pay attention to my heart and to pay attention to that spiritual relationship and live my life in the way that I was raised to do. And I want those families who struggle with faith while they're negotiating their relationship with their transgender kid to become aware of some of the things that that I get to see every day. And I get to see those families who come in and say, God doesn't make mistakes. My kid is not supposed to be transgender. You know, they just need to learn to be comfortable with being a boy or with being a girl. Those same families over and over come back and they say, you know what? I realize that God doesn't make mistakes. God gave me this child for me to step up. And that's a harder task. And they're not just blowing hot air out there. They really mean it. They recognize, oh, this is my spiritual journey to love this creation of God. So whether that's helpful to any of you or not, I think it matters. I think that because the presence of people like me distresses people, because it's become so political, because it's a religious debate. You know, I'm here to tell you that we're all navigating those questions. And from where I sit, I'm doing okay. And ultimately, when it comes down to some Bible verses, I kind of like the things like judge not, lest ye be judged, or the Lord works in mysterious ways. Yeah. Anyway, I think y'all better, well, no, you want me to keep going for another couple hours? You know, I hope that these words were helpful. I never know. Aaron might let me know, so let him know. And I just am so grateful for this time to have with you. I was really looking forward to it. I was nervous about it also. And you know what? So far, you're all right.
Yeah, we can be
no.
tough groups sometimes.
Say again?
So we can be tough groups sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you've been gentle with me, so maybe that's just because I kept talking. Didn't give you room. I just, you know, I'm really glad that you brought in the sports piece, because I mean, I really have at least a couple more hours of stuff I can talk to you. And that is definitely one of them, because it's part of our national dialogue right now. And I'm so tortured with the political aspect to it, because I'll tell you what, even though it was not a cakewalk moving through a gender transition 24 years ago, it wasn't politicized. I didn't have that on the table at the very least. And it breaks my heart that that is part of it. Because I'll tell you what, you find your most conservative, strong faith families, and they have trans children. And they need the support of their church communities in navigating this. Not pushed out because we can't deal with this. We don't know how to talk about this. Well, find some courage and find some open-hearted love and compassion, and go ahead and have the conversations. And it doesn't matter if people find their ways to full common ground. What it really matters is you love your kids. I love my kid. We can look out for each other. I want you to save my life if my life needs saving. And if I'm ever can be there for you, you can bet I want to do it. And I'm not going to ask for your voter ID card and what party you're registered with. Yeah. All right.
Aiden, you mentioned earlier that you have a gift, and I agree with you, and I'm thankful for that you're able to share it with us. I feel like that gift strikes a chord with a lot of the reasons why we are here to help people. We want to do our best to improve their life or and with that comes that conversation. So I just want to say thank you for helping us have a conversation. It may or may not lead to more. I hope it does, but I'm thankful for you being willing to come share your story. It means a lot.
Yeah. Well, just, you know, I think I already forgot, Jason? Yeah. So you said something about, say this is 2% of the population, 2% are, identifying as trans or some other term like that. I'm not here to tell you all what you need to do for the 2% of these human beings. It's really wanting to remind you that you already know what to do. For the most part, there are a few details, and that if I can help with the details, fantastic. What are the words? What do we say? Like, I get that piece, and I'm going to do my best to give you some of them, and also tell you that, in a year, somebody will correct you and say, that's wrong. And sorry about that.
And
But
that's okay, and it's happened.
Yes.
My immediate response when you addressed me was, yes, sir. Knowing what I know now, asking, wondering, okay, was that offensive to somebody? Saying, yes, sir, knowing that, you know what I mean? That's just automatic. That just flies out of my mouth. If I'm respectful. So in the desire to be respectful, did I?
yeah,
Somebody talks to me, addresses me, I want to address the fact, I know that they have my attention. And I might. Right.
I did work with the Washington State Convention Center, and one of the biggest things was sir or ma'am. That in their training, they were completely 100% expected and trained to engage with people in a respectful manner. So that meant using sir and ma'am. And it got them into occasional trouble. And so they're saying, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? And I said, well, again, I think you could take it up with leadership and say, hey, if you want us to be as gender inclusive as we can be, we're struggling. This is a barrier for us. So do we want to reconsider that? And if so, how do we reconsider that? And what they shared too is that if you've ever been to the convention center, there's those big long escalators, and you can have tens of thousands of people there for events. And they're coming down and somebody decides to shoot the breeze at the bottom of the escalator, you've got a problem there. So they have to ask people to step aside. And so they said, well, if we don't say sir or ma'am, what do we say? I said, excuse me with the red shirt. I wonder if you could step aside. It could be that simple. And again, it's so funny because it's for them, it was such a light bulb moment. But it's a way to get somebody's attention and ask and get them to do the thing that they hope for. And that is still a respectful way to go about it. But again, if we have gender as a convenient shorthand, then we're going to get tripped up on occasion with our sirs and ma'ams and our pronouns and welcome to a societal shift. My apologies and my congratulations all at the same time. It's a bit bumpy, and I have every confidence that you all will find your way simply based on what I've heard so far today. Get out.
Thank you.
Let's have a photo out of it.
Thank you, sir. I was wondering if somebody was gonna stop.